Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chris Lopez, and I have Charles Roberts with me here today. Hi, Charles. How are you?
I'm great, Chris. Thanks.
Great. And what we are doing on this webinar is our monthly roundup for December. So the best way to think of this is our virtual cup of coffee, where we get together for a virtual cup of coffee and talk real estate for half an hour, for an hour or so, about what happened in the previous month. So as you hopefully know by now, either come to the live webinar to ask questions and interact with us, but I realize a lot of times schedules do not work for it. If you can't make it, check out the recording on our podcast channel. Just go to Google and type in Denver Real Estate Investing Podcast, and we will pop up. And we actually have a special guest today here. It's Joe Massey, who's the loan officer over at Castle & Cook. He is going to talk about some of these deals and also share some other insight. Joe, welcome to the webinar.
Hey, thanks, Chris. Great to be here.
All right, so we're going to jump into the very first deal. And just give me a second to pull it up on screen here. And so this was, as I mentioned in the description, this threw a curveball to Joe and Charles and the buyer out there. So we'll run through the deal, and then we'll jump into what Joe and Charles were doing to save the deal. I heard some of the story. It's very interesting. I'm eager to hear the rest of the story. So Charles, I know you were the agent on this property on Louisiana Drive. So walk us through the deal and just kind of give us a breakdown of what the property is like.
Sure. So client Rick, great guy, wanted to buy his first investment property, probably mid-40s, pretty experienced person, very professional. I had him pre-qualified with Joe. Everything was good. So we go out our first day out and we're looking, and I told him what I always tell newer clients is, we're just going out to learn the market. We're not trying to buy anything. We're not trying to get something, get a steal today. It's just not like that. Let's just check out the market. And what happened is we actually saw a property that I thought, frankly, made a lot of sense. It was 15057 East Louisiana Drive. It was a two-story townhome. And after 20 years of doing this, I learned the same lesson over and over again, that you think you can invest with an app and with an Excel spreadsheet and with a lot of knowledge. And it turns out actually going and looking at the property is really one of the major tricks we find to finding properties. And I'll tell you why. This one, they were asking $235,000. It was a 3-bedroom, 3-bath, really large, 1,862 square feet. I said, hey, looks really nice. It's been remodeled, a little on the high price for a 3-bedroom, but a lot of square footage. And what I'm looking for in a situation like this is the opportunity to add a 4th bedroom. It's something that I've done many, many times, both as an investor and with clients. I think we've even had some webinars where we talked about this exact strategy. So we walked into this property. It was the second of, I think, 6 that we saw that day. And within seconds, I'm like, look at that. A perfect 4th bedroom off the living room, large area with a sliding glass door. It had electrical, it had heat vents. It basically needed a $1,500 wall and a door. So I, of course, pointed this out to Rick. And, again, like, it's not like you're buying this property. We're just out looking at properties. So we looked at this one for a while. Then we looked at the rest of them. And at the last one, after 2.5 hours or so, we kind of just started talking. He said, what do you think? I'm like, well, I definitely like the Louisiana one, but it's totally early in the process. And then he asked me the perfect question. He said, if I don't buy this, what are you going to do? I said, I'm going to call Mike. The minute you tell me you don't want this, I just have another person who is ready to go. And I literally, and I'm so glad he was honest, and I was completely honest. I said, Rick, you take all the time you need. This is your property. And if you take 4 days, I don't care. This is yours as far as I'm concerned. But if you tell me, you know what, Charles, it's early in the process and I don't want it, no problem. I literally, before, as I get into the car, I'm going to call my guy, Mike, and I'm going to say, hey, Mike, I got a property for you. So we chatted about it, and he made an offer, and it was a solid offer. And I think we came in like right about full price, if I remember, and we got it under contract.
So I'm looking at the MLS data sheet here. It says the original price was $250, and you guys got it for, I think, around $235. What was the deal with the price? Did you negotiate that down, or was it just sitting on the market for a while?
The latter. They did come in at $250, and the listing agent was a real experienced guy. Aaron has been a flipper and an agent for probably 20 plus years. He priced it at 250, like many sellers in this market. He's pushing the envelope. He felt that way. And I think it's really important to understand that you can have a 20-year guy who's a professional flipper and he's a professional real estate agent, and he didn't actually call the price right. The market basically said no. So he did a price drop from 250 to 235, and we picked it up at 235 and, came in with a seriously, strong offer. He actually had multiple offers, but I would say partly with Joe's help, good lender letter, really solid lender speaking to him, we did get it under contract at full current price, which was the second price of 235.
All right. So let's run through the numbers here. So can you see the spreadsheet, Charles?
Well, I actually have the spreadsheet, but I'm not seeing it from you. I certainly haven't.
Oh, you know what? I guess it would probably help if I shared my screen, huh?
Yeah, I don't think anybody can see it right now.
Oh, wow.
How about that?
All right.
Okay,
there we go.
Okay, beautiful. Yeah, we see it now.
Wonderful. I'm glad it only took 10 minutes to figure out.
Yeah, thanks, Mike Kendig, for telling us a few minutes ago. Sorry about that. You couldn't see the screen.
All right, so now we can see the screen. Thank you, Mike. So, Charles, we did what, 20% down this property? Do you remember?
Joe, why don't we talk about it?
He did 20% down. We originally looked at 25. And then as Rick got more involved in the property, he decided to do 20% down, which does have a little bit of a higher interest rate and closing costs as compared to 25% down. But it made sense for him because it allowed him to stretch and buy additional properties in the future by not using up all of his capital on the first property.
All right, and so I see the purchase price at $235. We put $2,000 in for acquisition cost and $2,000 for the initial repair cost. That was for the wall, right, Charles?
Yeah, so I actually had my guy, while I was actually at the property originally with Rick, I called my guy Dave, who has been my guy for, 10, 12 years now. Like he's the guy who can screw in light bulbs and I'm the guy who can run a business. When I need stuff, I give it to him and vice versa. I called Dave, said, Dave, I got about an 18-foot wall here, simple as pie, on hardwood. What would it cost? And he said about $1,200. I said, okay, look, here's my advice. Tell Rick $1,500, but I'm going to tell Rick that every day after your committed day that you don't get it done, you lose 100. I'm like the intimate. I know Joe's laughing at me.
I love it. Give a bonus for performance.
I said, Dave, I want you to make money from this, but do not F up. Just don't screw up. And it actually ended up working out beautifully. They loved each other and they're working together now. But that's what it came down to was $1,500. I actually don't know if he put any other money, so I put $2,000 here, I guess. But in fact, it was a bid for $1,500. I think that's what he ended up paying.
Okay, and we got the interest rate here at 4.875. Does that sound right, Joe?
This particular one was actually 5 1/8, 5.125. That obviously varies every day.
And part of that was because it was 20%
down on a condo.
What would it have been if it had been 25?
Had it been 25% down, would have been 4.75%.
Okay, so right in there.
Mm-hmm.
It's good to know.
Great. And then, of course, over a 30-year term. And I think the rent you guys were expecting was $2,100 a month, right?
Yeah. So for folks who've actually been listening the last few months, you may remember we did one on, I believe, was it Louisiana, where it was a very similar situation, a 3-bedroom, 3-bath, and we made it a 4-bedroom. And I think we got like 2078 or something on that one. Cutting to the chase, sort of skipping 6 things, we actually already have a tenant who's approved at 2,100. So it's a Section 8 tenant. So obviously we'll talk about that when we get to that point. But we've got the tenant, so I put in 2,100 because that's our best guess. I think on the 14th, they're having their inspection from Aurora Housing Authority.
Oh, great.
Yeah, awesome.
Real estate taxes, $894. Property insurance, about $300. Is he doing a property management or is he self-managing? Do you know, Charles?
Yeah, he's going to self-manage, which talk about with every new client, talking about the pros and cons. Typically, my clients tend to start self-managing and generally don't change because they find out it's just not as bad as they think. But yeah, Rick is self-managing.
Okay, so leave that blank for now. Now, I know some people, if you go on the internet, you read different trains of thoughts out there. Some people, they say, even if you're self-managing, go ahead and budget for the property management to give you true numbers. That's completely your call. We tend to actually do real numbers. If you're hiring a property manager, we put it in there. If not, hey, it's just more money at the end of the year. HOA for the year, let's see, the monthly HOA was a little bit on the higher side, right? Yeah. It was $295.
Yeah, it's 295. So that's the yearly HOA right there. I
35,
mean,
40 for the year.
yeah, but on a what ended up being a 4 bedroom at 2100, that comes out to a reasonable percentage, but it was a relatively high HOA. But once again, I advise people, like, the idea of saying I will never buy a property, with an HOA above 280 is insane. That doesn't mean anything. What if you can make $1 million a day on that property, but it has, you have to look at it in perspective. And that's why Joe's spreadsheet is so valuable. It gives you the perspective. It gives you the cash on cash and the cap rate. So while 295 is somewhat high, you're going to see the numbers and why they came out so good.
Yeah, and this is who cares about, like, exactly. You said it perfectly. So the cash on cash at the numbers we just talked about is 11% cash on cash, and the cap rate of 7.8, and right around a 20% IRR. So Charles, I mean, you know the market. What's this? How does this compare to other deals out there? Is just a home run, a grand slam, a base hit? What's
Yeah.
your thought on these numbers?
So let me back up on one thing. If you look at the MLS sheet, and we can go back and look at it later or whatever, this was a full remodel. Aaron did a full remodel on this. Like, just look at some of the comments he has here. I don't even remember what they say. I just assume they say something about the full remodel. Large open air, beautiful spread. I mean, it had granite.
Why don't you just read it?
Yeah, sure. It says, large, open, light bright, sprawling townhouse with skylights, full slab granite counters, stainless steel appliances, shimmering / new carpet, gleaming floors, fresh paint, new interior doors, 3 beds, 3 bath, master with private bath and walk-in closet, adjacent to park, literally adjacent to a park, 2-car attached garage, central air, cozy gas fireplace, walkout deck. I mean, like, this is a nice place. So to put in perspective, which I think is my favorite word, perspective, this was a 7.8 cap out of the gate. And this was a brand new, this was a sell to an owner occupant, not investor type quality property. So I would say the numbers were a double. But given the fact the quality of this property next to a park, I mean, this is almost a triple. Like, this one was very much a nice property. We felt great about, and I've complimented Rick over and over, because this was, the second property he saw. I mean, I would have been completely fine and understanding if he said, Charles, I'm just not ready. I would have said, no problem. Let's go out 5 more times. No problem. But he made the right decision, and I'm just glad he's going to make a ton of money from this property.
Yeah.
All right. So any comments from either guys on the spreadsheet before we jump into the what you guys had to do to save the deal at the last minute?
Yeah, I would like to make one comment here. Can you go back, Chris, to the inputs tab? I'd like to make a change. And Charles, I'm going to phrase this question to you. Let's say this was a 3-bedroom, which is what it showed in the MLS. What would the rent amount be?
Probably 1850, 1875. Market rent on something like this might have been higher. I think a lot Section 8. I think this is a case where this was a 2-car garage on top of everything. I think this was an interesting example where market rate would have been higher than Section 8 because it was such a damn nice property. So maybe 19, even more. A little more with market rent, and maybe 1850 or so for Section 8. Wild guess.
Chris, let's say 1850, if you would. Now, what is that? So previously we were at a 7.8 cap rate, and now look at this. This is a 6.6% cap rate. So the reason I wanted to point that out is Charles did something that I think a lot of real estate investors fail to do, and that is go out and look at enough properties. They wouldn't have found this had they been sitting on their couch plugging properties into the MLS. They would have said, oh, it's only a 6.6 cap. I'm not going to go out and bother with it. That's not good enough because I don't buy anything under a 7 cap. But guess what? They were out looking at properties, doing what they're supposed to be doing, looking at deals, and they found this, that holy cow, if we add a little bit of value, we can make a lot of money here. So it's a cap rate difference of 1.2%, which is significant. That makes this from a near miss to not a home run, but maybe a solid double.
Yeah.
So I think you can't overstate the value in going out and looking at properties and having an agent like Charles or Chris that know how to add value and say, hey, you know what? Think through this for a minute. This probably doesn't get me excited the way it is, but let's throw up this wall, and what kind of value does that add? Tremendous difference. And shoot, look at the cash flow. The difference between these two, $3,200 if it's a 3-bedroom, $6,100 if it's a 4-bedroom. That's $2,900 difference. That $1,500 or $2,000 wall pays for itself in the first 9 months. I mean, great job. Kudos, Charles.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. And to continue the discussion, Chris, about was this like a single or a double, another perspective is what you and I were talking about an hour ago. I spent a while yesterday just sitting down, looking at every property in Denver, trying to find something. And there was just nothing right now. So compared to everything else I can find right now, this is practically a home run. Now, maybe in March or September or something, the inventory will loosen up a little bit, as it sometimes does over periods of time. But compared to what I can find literally at this moment, I'm just so glad that Rick made the right decision on this, because this is a really great property for him.
And just to give everyone perspective, we have a lot of people who listen to the recording. So today is January 9th, and I think you guys got this property under contract right after Thanksgiving?
Yeah, something like that.
Okay, so about what, 8 weeks ago, and there's that much difference in the market.
Yeah, and I think we'll talk about that as we go in. But something you and I have chatted about is I've been doing this for 20 years, and last January and February was without a doubt the worst 8 weeks I've ever seen for inventory that I've ever seen in 20 years. And you hear people sort of constantly complain about the market, and I really make fun of those people. But this was true. I can just look at the number of closings I had January, February, and March of last year. There were almost none because there was nothing out there. So I'm thinking, I don't know if it's cyclical or what, but I can tell you at this moment, it is extremely dry. And I'm kind of, wondering if it's going to be dry for another month or two. I don't know. I'll check every day, but that's the way it is right now.
And Chris, I did pull up these dates. This property went under contract on November 29th, and we closed on December 22nd. And the tenant is moving in when, Charles?
14th, January 14th.
Okay, so from the day they found the property to the day the tenant's moving in, just over 45 days. That's pretty solid.
It makes me feel good.
Yeah, wow. Pretty solid in my book.
Yeah. So Joe, I want to hear the details on what happened with this deal, because I heard a little bit from Charles. I heard a little bit from you. I got a snippet over email about how the deal was alive on a piece of string, essentially. I'm interpreting what I remember. But Joe, jump into how things were going, and then what was the major curveball you guys had, and how did you overcome it?
So Chris, it sounds like you want me to describe why I'm the greatest lender ever. Is that right?
I think those are my exact words. Yes, exactly what I said.
So let me give you some background. So for our listeners out there that aren't familiar, when you're buying a condo, one of the due diligence steps is that the lender is going to request a condo questionnaire, and we're going to request information about the homeowners association. Now, a lot of people aren't familiar with this, because if you buy a single family residence wherever you live, there's no HOA. We're really just looking at you, and is the property solid? Yes, great, we're moving on. Well, when you buy a condo, you're introducing a third party into the transaction, which is the homeowners association. So now we're looking at you, the buyer, we're looking at the property, and we're looking at the HOA, because the HOA does have a significant amount of control over that property. So we review the HOA on every transaction when it's a condo to make sure that the HOA is sound and there's no major issues that could create problems down the road. And so what we request from every homeowners association is a copy of the condo questionnaire. So it's a 5-page form that many HOAs have it already filled out, and we call them and they zip it right over to us. Some HOAs are not as organized, and we have to send over the blank form, and they take some time and they go through and answer every question and then send it back to us. We also need a copy of the budget and the financial statement to see, how much are they planning to save for reserves? Do they have a reserve study? And it's, it makes sense that, maybe the building needs exterior maintenance. Do they have money held in savings or reserve for that? We look to make sure they're reserving enough on a monthly or annual basis for future maintenance items. We're also going to look at issues on the financial statements. Are there large delinquencies? Do you have a large bad debt balance? Do you have a high percentage of the units that are behind on their HOA dues? Another big important thing that we look at on the condo questionnaire is the percentage of ownership. Let's say it has 20 units and you have 5 of these units owned by the same person. So you have 25% of the control of the complex under the control of one person. That could be an issue. We look at investor concentration, and that could be an issue. Let's say this is 20 units, and you have 60% of the units owned by investors. That can be an issue for conventional financing. We also look to see, is there litigation on the project? Or is the HOA involved in any sort of lawsuit over construction defect or maybe an insurance issue? We're looking for issues that could result in a special assessment down the road, which would impact the financial stability of the HOA and financial stability of the borrower. We're also looking for issues that impact today's financial stability. We're looking for issues that may show an increase in foreclosures. For example, high delinquencies on your HOA dues is a leading indicator for foreclosures. And so pretty much every lender, if you're getting a new mortgage, is going to review that. Every lender is going to have their own rules and requirements for what they're looking at and what their issues are. But it's an important point to understand that when you're buying a condo, you've got to build in, 24 hours to sometimes a week to 2 weeks to get that questionnaire back from the HOA. And there may also be a cost associated with it. Some HOAs provide that information to the buyer for free. Some HOAs charge $50, $100, $200. I've even seen $250 to provide that information.
And so when you got this, go ahead.
No, go ahead. What were you going to ask?
I was going to say, because I know something, what on that condo sheet caused the issue?
Okay, so in this one, it was interesting. This was a homeowners association that was not very well organized, very nice people. We sent over the request for the condo questionnaire. We called them, followed up. I have a terrific team that I work with, and we reached out to the HOA every day for 2 weeks before we were finally able to get this condo questionnaire. Now, to fill it out from beginning to end is about a 15-minute process, but for whatever reason, the HOA took a very long time to do it. Once they finally got this information back to us, I'd have to go back and look at my notes, but I believe this complex had 46 units, and they indicated that 25 of them were investor units and 21 of them were primary residence units. Well, that's greater than 50% investor concentration. And that's an issue because high investor concentration is a leading indicator for potential foreclosures in the future. It's also a leading indicator for reserve issues in the future because it's oftentimes investors would not increase the HOA dues to keep the property up as nice as a primary resident occupant would. And so we get this, and immediately we think, boy, Rick is not going to qualify for conventional financing, not because there's anything wrong with Rick, not because there's anything wrong with the property, but this HOA is not in good shape. It's not in bad shape. All their financials were good, but they have an awful lot of investors in there, and that can create an issue. So I reached out to the condo association lady, and I said, hey, can you verify this? I said, this is close, and I want to make sure that this is all correct. And I said, it took us about 2 weeks, so I'm worried that, maybe this information is not accurate. Well, she responded and said, no, we checked it. It's all correct. I said, all right, well, I'm going to do a little homework on this. And so I went out to county records and printed out the county records for every single property in this homeowners association. And I printed out every one of them and compared where's the property and where's the mailing address for that unit. And what do you know? They had the numbers backwards. It was 25 investors, 25 primary residents and 21 investors. And so I printed that out, circled it, put together a nice little presentation, scanned it over, contacted the folks over at the HOA and the manager there at the HOA and said, hey guys, I think your information is backwards. Please look at this. And at this point they said no. They said, you know what, we're not reviewing any more information. The information that we have is there's 25 investors. We don't really care what the county says. And I said, well, the county says there's only 21 investors. And that's kind of a big deal, right? It's going to impact Rick's financing. And they said, well, we're not reviewing it anymore. It is what it is. And so,
Joe, let me ask you, I'm just really curious now from my own standpoint, is that essentially the check the underwriters do to see investors versus owner occupied is just where the tax mailing statement goes to? Is that the litmus test they use?
No, we take the information from the homeowners association. The HOA provides that. And okay. That's why I needed the HOA to correct it, because we had something proving the HOA is wrong, we asked the HOA to correct it and they didn't want to.
And let me just jump in here. So when Joe started telling me this, you think you've seen it all. Well, stop thinking, because I was stunned when he told me this. And it's like, Joe, you actually checked? Like, I've never heard of a lender doing that. I was amazed. I really, really was. I mean, Joe and I are good friends and colleagues and all that kind of stuff, but talk about above and beyond. He literally saved the deal because he went and actually checked. But he's going to continue in telling you that the world's worst HOA, an HOA person, actually wouldn't take his data, and this person should be fired.
And here's the thing, it's not even my data, it's the county data.
For God's sake.
I'm just the one that compiled it. Yeah. And so the HOA person said, no, we're not going to review it. We're not doing anything. It is what it is. We're sure that our records are right and you're wrong. Well, that creates a problem because now I've got to provide the condo questionnaire to my underwriter, and they're going to look at it and say, you know what? No, this is greater than 50% investor concentration. You cannot get a conventional loan. And Rick is going to have to contact a non-warrantable lender like First Bank maybe and get a non-warrantable condo loan, which is going to be a higher rate, an adjustable rate, not a 30-year fixed, and probably more money down. That's going to start to impact his cash-on-cash return. So we spent some time talking about it, looking at it, and Rick still loved this property. He said, yeah, you know what? If we can't do it, I still want to buy this property. It still makes sense. It's not as good of terms, but it's still a good property. Well, we begin the process to transfer the file over to First Bank. And in thinking about it, I said, guys, we're going to go ahead and transfer it over to First Bank so they can start working on it, but I want to continue to do some homework here. I reached out to my underwriter and ran through the situation with her, and she felt like I did. She said, it seems like there's bad information that we're getting. She said, send me the information and let's review it. And there's a special process with Fannie Mae that we can send up a condo questionnaire for them to review. It's called PERS, the Property Eligibility Registration System. And they'll review it and say, you know what, yeah, we're okay. You can move forward with this. No, you're not okay because here's the problems. But normally, lenders like myself, we don't need to send it up because we know their guidelines and we know what is and is not accurate information. So I sent this to my head underwriter and I said, hey, take a look at this. Tell me what you think. And she said, I can't do it today. It's going to have to be tomorrow. I said, no problem. We're already transferring it to First Bank, but I want you to think about it. Well, she called me the next day. She said, Joe, I went through this. And she said, I'd be happy to send this up to PERS, but we don't need to. She said, your information is very clear that the data that we got from the HOA is not accurate. We have supporting emails that say they're not willing to review it and they're not willing to update their information. And we have county records, which, kind of trumps what the HOA has because the county records is what we've told public records where the mail is going to go to. She reviewed it and said, I don't believe the HOA is providing accurate information. I believe these county records are accurate. I'm going to support this. We're going to approve this complex and we can approve your loan. And we had a final approval and clear to close on that transaction less than 8 hours later, simply by doing the research, having a good relationship with our underwriter, and providing good, clear, accurate data.
So, Charles, I've heard you as we've been out talking with different investors as you're, helping people get all the details figured out. I've heard you say definitely more than once, more than twice, more than 5 times, to work with a local lender and not with one of the big banks. Now, do big banks do the research like Joe or the local lenders? Do they go to that detail of get the deal done?
I can honestly say in 20 years, I've never heard of anything like this. So I don't even think I just think Joe did an amazing job. This webinar isn't all about Joe, but
it's not.
When he told me this, I was freaking stunned. I was stunned by this because before he sent this to his underwriter, I said, so there's basically a 0% chance she's going to overrule it, right? And you said yes.
I said, yeah. I said,
we just figured.
So. Yeah.
But we did it because we wanted to do all the due diligence and he had done the work. So I don't even think this is a question of big lender versus little lender. This was just an exceptional situation where the lender went and did something no one's ever heard of doing, as far as I know, and closed this deal. And we're very glad he did.
Yeah. And I think it's important, Chris, that had we said no, had my underwriter said no, you know what, this information is conflicting, that's okay. We're still going to get everything over to First Bank so that Rick can continue moving forward. I'm going to do everything I can to facilitate the transaction. Even though we're not closing it, I want Rick to be able to close on the transaction so that he can buy the property, and maybe he'll remember to call me for the next one.
And by the way, he had already sent stuff to John Williams at First Bank, my First Bank guy. So we actually had a potential backup. It just wasn't a 30-year fixed. But that's part of the process that I think I, as an investor, want, and professional investors want, is a group of people who are actually doing things like this. And on top of everything, I'm going to give John Williams from First Bank some major kudos.
He was great.
Because Aaron was pretty pissed that we were suddenly going to miss our closing. And John was able to do it, or said he could commit to doing it in about 16 days, which is unheard of for First Bank. Eventually, we ended up closing it with Joe, and I went back to John, like, John, man, you got my kudos, and that was great. But I felt great about that as well.
So let me ask you a question. I don't know if you guys remember this, but the terms that he got conventional with you, Joe, was 30-year fixed at a 5.125% interest rate. What would the terms be like at First Bank?
So First Bank, it was a 4.75% rate, but it was not fixed. It was adjustable after 3 years. So that's,
I think 7, wasn't it?
I don't know.
Yeah, we usually do 7-1 arms.
7 years.
I'm guessing this is a 7-1 arm.
After 7 years, excuse me. So you can change it to 4.75. Now, it's not going to be represented anywhere on the spreadsheet that it was adjustable, but just know that in year number 8, the payment would increase. Now, the other important point is it was now 30% down. It was no longer 20% because it's a non-warrantable condo. You need a larger down payment. So take a look at what that does to the numbers. All right, cap rate doesn't change. That's still 7.8%. His cash on cash return is still 11%, but now he's investing an additional 10%. So it's another $23,000 or $24,000 down. That impacts his ability to buy the next property. Right. And this property is going to have a higher principal and interest payment 8 years from now.
Very interesting.
Yeah. I mean, this is, for those of you listening, maybe you're in your car right now or something, like, there's a lot going on here. So I appreciate you hanging with us, and I think we should continue talking about it. But if you want to be an investor, if you want to understand this stuff, this is the type of subtleties that make all the difference between people who buy property and don't, people who build wealth and do not build wealth. This is where the rubber meets the road. And this is what nobody wants to think about. They just want to get a great deal at 60% off. And that's just horseshit. This is the business right here.
Yep.
So I know we got some people live ask questions. I did not mention that yet on the webinar. If you guys have any questions on what we talk about or all the details we just went into, please ask away. But I purposely asked Joe and Charles to go really deep on this deal because, frankly, I wanted to learn it for myself, and I know a lot of other people could benefit from this as well. So please ask any questions that you have. And Joe, I just wanted to, totally off topic, I want to loop back around. You talked about how with condos with the HOAs, you have to send out that document agreement. Well, you just helped me get a loan for a primary residence down in Highlands Ranch, which is an HOA. Is the paperwork or this, is it the same scrutiny that you do with an HOA in like a Highlands Ranch versus an HOA that you do in a condo complex?
Good question. And the answer to that is no. So Highlands Ranch, that's more of a community HOA that if there were a problem with that HOA, you basically don't get to go to the pool and you might have to sign up for your own trash service, right? Okay. Kind of not a big deal in our eyes as the lender. So no, we did not review anything on a single family residence because that's more of a master or community HOA. A condo, you have a problem with that HOA, all of a sudden, now the roof isn't being maintained. Now the exterior of the building isn't being maintained. Now the insurance is not being paid on the property. So to answer your question, no, we really don't get into HOAs on single family residence. It's really only for properties where the HOA has a direct impact on the day-to-day operations of the property.
Good to know. Thank you. All right, gentlemen, before we move on to deal number 2, any final thoughts or topics or questions I missed on Rick's deal here on Louisiana?
So we closed on what, December 22nd, I think it was?
Yeah, December 22nd.
Okay, so Dave, literally it was a Friday. I was actually out of town. I was in Madrid, vacationing with my son, but we closed, no problem. Joe goes to his closings. Once again, thank you for covering that.
Yep.
And literally Dave, my guy, just moved in, that afternoon with all his stuff, not really moved in, but started the work. And within 4 days, he had the wall up. And he sent me pictures, and I was, in Spain looking at the work getting done. And he did a great job. He put up a wall. It was $1,500. He made some money. Rick was really happy, and they got a tenant. And in 5 days, they'll have the Section 8 inspection, which I really expect them to pass because this place is in perfect shape. So I have to say, not all deals certainly have a situation like Joe went through and come back from it, and certainly aren't this, kind of good in every way, but this one worked out really nicely.
Pretty solid. Yeah.
All right, so we got a question here from Mike. I think he said this is directed to you, Charles. You said that an investor needs to know the market. What realtor will take the time to show 40 to 50 properties?
That's a good question. A loaded property, loaded question. So the fact is, I have. Do I want to do that with everybody all the time? No, but I will tell you, I'm telling you now what I tell everybody is that to learn the market, you need to go out and look at properties. And the more you know about the market, the more likely you are going to make the right decision, which hopefully will be for you to buy the property that makes sense for you. So the answer is, I don't know, me, I suppose. And I would say good agents. Yeah, we have a business. So if you're trying to buy a 45-cent property, I don't want to spend 10 million hours with you. There is a little bit of an internal rate of return on our business. But at the same time, I have a gentleman that I've closed 36 deals with. I have another one in the 30s, and I have 5 or 6 in the 20s. You do that because you do the right thing and you build a business that way. So the answer is there are agents, starting with Chris and I, we want to do the right thing, not because we're angels, because if we do the right thing with the right client and the right client buys property and begins to trust us and we build an association, we all make a lot of money. It's just simple business.
And
can I add something to that?
Go ahead.
So I'm not an agent, so I don't spend time going out and looking at properties. But what I will tell you is I work with a lot of agents, and I know a ton of agents that will show dozens and dozens of property to serious clients. So I think Mike's question is great. If you just want to, Charles and I know some people that are not serious, and they call up and they're like, oh, I want to look at this, want to look at that. And you know what? We quickly identify if you're serious or not. One really easy way to prove your agent that you're serious is get pre-approved. Right. And then I can say, hey, you know what, Charles, this person is serious. They've got their down payment. They need to get out there and look at some properties. But yes, they're serious about buying a property and they have the ability to buy a property. If you don't want to talk with a lender, you don't want your credit pulled, I would encourage an agent not to spend a ton of time showing you properties because you may not be serious. So I think that's what the buyer really needs to do is distinguish themselves to the agent that I'm serious. I'm not just a looky-loo.
So let me add to that, because I was an investor for 7 years before I got my license. So I still consider myself really an investor. Who wants to actually call themselves a real estate agent, right? And what I did when I was an investor was I worked with one agent and I was loyal to that agent, and that agent worked hard for me and I worked hard for the agent. It's a two-way street is the bottom line. So continuing to go back to Mike's question, yes, good agents will work with people and try to find the right property for them if they are treated well and treated respectfully and, get pre-qualified and aren't, stupid. Actually are professional, or if they're not yet professional, want to be professional. And once again, all you hear in real estate is buy a great deal, and that's the way it works. And people like Joe and I sort of roll our eyes because we get to see the real world. And of course you want the best deal you can possibly get, but it's all these subtleties that we're talking about. You don't build the great team by making 5 phone calls and slapping people around. You build a great team, especially if you're new at this, by saying, hey, I'm new, but I'm serious. I would love to, learn from you, work from you. Here is my plan. And you will get serious people on our side to work with you. It's just a really, really important lesson that, for example, Rick, the buyer, man, he impressed the hell out of me and Joe when we first met him. Joe, you were there.
Love it.
I talked to him for 45 minutes. Joe was walking by. I'm like, Joe, come in. You got to meet this guy. And this guy, he built a really quick trust with us, and good, he got a great property. He's going to buy more and he's going to make a lot of money. That's why we love this business.
Yep.
Great. All right, well, let's move on to property number 2. Let me just clear my notes here. All right. So
And in the
Charles,
meantime, I was
oh,
just going to
go
say,
ahead.
anything, Mike, if you have any follow-up questions or anybody else, please, as you can see, we love answering questions. The harder, the better. Anything you got.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be on topic. Ask any question. You got great guys here with Charles and Joe. Pick their brains. So Charles, here's the second property we're looking at here. This is in First Creek, which is one of your favorite complexes. So Charles, take it away.
Love this area.
Yeah. Okay. So we're chuckling because so this is the 19th property I've closed in this 250 unit complex or whatever it is since January of 2016. So
I think they're going to elect you mayor of
yeah,
First Creek HOA.
I'm called the mayor as I walk through the streets. I love this. So long story short, I bought 3 properties there about 2 years ago. Loved it, and just started getting more investors there. Joe, you own how many have we bought there?
2.
He's bought 2 there. I know 7, 8, 9 different colleagues, investors, agents who own multiple properties. Like, we really, really like it. So Mike was the buyer, and Mike has a lot of money. He's got a very successful business. He wants to buy a bunch of properties and start kind of getting his income that way. So we're going to look at the numbers here, but let me start by saying First Creek, we really like the complex. They're relatively newer deals, builds. They settled a lawsuit about 2 years ago, got about $11 million for a whole bunch of construction defect stuff. So they're doing tons of improvements. They have a low HOA at $209. So this one came on the market at $233.9. David Babineau, who is a longtime colleague of mine, were board members at the Denver Board of Realtors years ago. Just awesome to have David on the other side, because I could call him up like, David, it's Charles. Charles, what can I do for you? I want to buy your property. Great. So we put an offer in and we got it. And it was, I think we put it in at like 230, and they basically counted at full price. And I'm like, yep, okay, we're going to do it. So we bought this at full price, and we're going to show you the numbers. And what you're going to see are the numbers were not nearly as good as the last property we looked at. So feel free to, do you want to start walking through them, Chris?
I have a question first. Where did you find this property?
This was found on the MLS.
Like on the MLS where anybody could buy it?
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, and by the way, same one as last, and probably 80% of what we do, 85% are MLS properties, and we get a few wholesale deals and find a few, pickups from other places as well. Yep. Do you want to go through this, Chris?
Yeah, so I will start running through numbers here. So we assumed 20% down, a purchase price of $233,000 and $900. And rent was.
I'm sorry. So yes, we are assuming 20% down to show the numbers compared to other 20% downs, but this one my guy did pay cash for.
Okay. So what was the monthly rent in that unit?
So first off, the seller is buying another place. So we did a 60-day lease back at, I think we did it like $1,700 or $1,800. I can tell you that I'm getting market rent's about $1,850 right now on these properties. Oh, $1,875. That's right. It did go up. So I have all of mine Section 8. This is another location where we have seen non-Section 8 get a little bit more than Section 8, because newer properties out by the airport, a pretty nice complex. It has 2 parks with like kids can play on and stuff. But anyway, $1,875 is what we consider the market rent. Are the tenants moving out, or the previous seller, who is now the tenant, is moving out in about 6 weeks, but we expect $1,875.
Okay, so leave that in there since the 2-month rent back doesn't really count. Real estate taxes are $1,052 for the year, assuming $300 for property insurance. Property management, do you know, is he self-managing or hiring it out?
If I remember correctly, I believe he's self-managing, so
Okay.
I think he is, yeah.
We'll leave that blank. Repairs and maintenance, standard 5% of rent, so $800 a year. And HOA dues about $2,500 for the year.
So Joe, let's talk about that for a second, because up until recently, their HOA was $180 per month.
Yep, just went up.
They bumped them up $29, and they have a very active HOA. And do you want to talk about, because I know you and I chatted, like why they added another $29 per month?
I don't remember the reason why, but I remember being in support of it. Oh, it was reserves. That's right. They're worried that they're not going to have enough for future maintenance of the property, maintenance of the streets, maintenance of the dumpster areas, maintenance of the exterior of the buildings, the roofs, etc. And you know what? I support it. I live in an HOA where I personally live. It's not a condo, but it's an attached property. And everyone gripes and whines every time the HOAs go up. And I vote for it every single time because I'd rather spend another $5 or $10 or $20 a month so that I know my property is going to be valuable 5, 10, 20 years from now.
And what was also interesting is I'm going to screw up the numbers a little bit, but they reserved like 240,000 in 17, and they just wanted to get to like 300. It's not like they're negative. Like,
right.
We all, and again, like when we go to like yearly meetings, like half of us know each other. Like I talked to, Travis and Jackie and everybody else, and we all were like, hey, yeah, these guys are pretty conservative.
Right, that money's going into savings.
Yeah, they're putting a lot of money away.
It's not like they wanted to, build a new parking section. Right. They want to put that money into savings for future maintenance. I support it 100%.
And you've heard me use the term subtleties a lot. This is another subtlety. This is one of the reasons why I like this complex a lot, and we've closed 19 deals here because they think this way. They want to put a lot of money away, and that's good. Like that is something I want to see in a property I invest in. That's why I bought 3 off the bat 2 years ago.
Gosh, I feel like I need to buy a property over there to be in the cool kids club with you guys.
You should. Make some money.
Yeah.
All right. All right. So getting on with the spreadsheet here. Again, these numbers aren't entirely accurate because the buyer bought with cash, but we're assuming 20%. Just try to keep things apples to apples. So cash on cash, is 9%. Cap rate's at a 7.1. So Charles, Joe, how's that compared to other properties of that complex, and how's it compared to the rest of Denver over there?
Yeah, so it's very similar to other properties in the complex. They're going for 230, 240. And by the way, just to be honest, the ones, Joe, how much did you pay for the 2 similar properties that you bought maybe 23 and 27 months ago, if I remember correctly?
I paid $165 for one of them and $160 for the other.
Yeah, and I bought mine 24 months ago, 23 months ago, and 22 months ago, and I paid right on 170 for all 3, somewhat coincidentally. So, the market's about 235, 240 for these. We got an okay deal.
Oh, I'm sorry, I lied. 165 and 170.
Okay, so right on. So we've made a lot of capital gains, which is really, really nice. So let's focus on the cap rate.
Well, so let me ask you, so when you guys bought those, did you get it at a steep discount, or did you just pay going rate at the time?
Okay, so not only did I pay going, I won't bore you with a long story, but the 3rd property I bought, I had it under contract. The listing agent was a buddy of mine who I know quite well. Not once, but twice over the course of the 30 days I was under contract, they raised the price on me. Because I don't know if you remember this, Joe, but what happened was the guy who lived there was in the military, had lived there for like 2.5 years, never actually made a payment, and was kind of lying about everything. And every time they turned around, they realized he owed more. The first time was like another $1,800, and then the second time was like $1,400. I'm like, you can't be serious.
Right, to prevent it from being a short sale, Charles, we're going to need you to pay this.
No shit. Twice I had to actually unilaterally let him create an amend, extend, and raise the price on me. How about that for a story? But I bought it at 170 and I could sell it at 235 2 years later.
Pretty solid.
All right, just want to point that out because a lot of times people, if they try to go for the discount, they never get their foot in the game. So Charles, you're talking about the numbers. I'll let you get back onto that.
Right. So this is a 7.1 cap. This is not a great cap. If I looked at, say, the last 20 or 30 properties that my guys have bought, I would say they range from about a 6.9, 7 up to, we've had some well into the 8s. I think we had a couple of low 9s and stuff, but typically mid 7s is what we've seen a lot of, like properties that we actually get in the mid 7s where we are. This one is a little bit lower, but it made sense for Mike. Mike was buying multiple properties. He doesn't need to, but he wants to buy them sooner rather than later. We really like this complex. Let's not forget that he got money day one. Let's say $1,700, something like that was the rent back. So for the first 60 days, it wasn't like he needed 30 days. That's another $1,700. You add that to, say, another person who buys a property and takes 30 days to fill it. All of these subtleties made a difference. And we have the right within 30 days of the lease ending to show the property. So his plan is to have someone move in the day after these people move out. So a 7-1 cap, it's a little lower than we'd like to see, but this was built in, I think, 2008 or 2010. We like the HOA. He's getting money from day one. No problem. He didn't hesitate. He put in, we ended up going full price on
it. Plus, sorry, I'm losing my voice here. Say, plus, doing that lease back for a couple months, it pushes them out of having to rent a place right around Christmas to now in late winter, early spring. So not the best time, but also a better time as well. So another thing was just in the favor of this making a good deal.
That's right.
Excuse me. So I know we spent a lot of time analyzing the last property. Any questions from the audience out there, or Joe and Charles, any final thoughts on this deal before we move on?
You know, I would call this a solid single. The right property for the right guy, and we're going to continue doing properties in this complex, I think. It makes sense. And one of the things that I counsel investors is when you haven't done this for a while, you can be very smart, but unless you have the experience, you think that everybody wants the same property. You think there's one property out there, it's the best deal. And it's so important to understand that that's actually just not reality. Different properties appeal to different investors who have different sets of criteria. This property was the perfect property for Mike, and it made sense, even though it's a little bit low on the cap. For a client of mine, perhaps they would have said, you know what, I don't want a 7-1, I want, something else. And I would say, great, then it may take longer and we may have to take some more risks or whatever we have to do. But this is just a good example of a lay down single, whereas the last one we did was, double or triple and different situations.
Great. All right. So as we move on to the next topic here, so as everyone knows out there, Congress and the president signed in a major tax overhaul. So we're not going to go into a big discussion on this because a lot of articles are out there about that. But just a couple of questions I want to ask Joe and Charles here. So Joe, I remember a month or 2 months ago, we were sitting around the office and you mentioned some statistic about what percentage of people actually use the interest rate deduction when they itemize their taxes. What is that? Or can you give us that stat on there? Because I was incredibly surprised by how low it was.
Yes, less than 25% of now that doesn't mean there's 300 million people in the United States and only 25% have the mortgage interest tax deduction. It means that of the homeowners that qualify for the mortgage interest tax deduction, only 25% of them actually use it. So very, very low percentage.
And we are assuming that will go down given the new situations. Right.
Potentially, yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah, I think that's accurate.
Yeah, I would bet my life on it. I bet your life on it.
That's pretty low stakes.
I like that you changed the bet there, Charles. So I'm always interested in the behavior of what taxes can have on people. So, or the impact on behavior. So, have you guys seen, or do you guys predict any behavioral changes in the way people are buying properties? Is this going to have a huge downward pressure on prices? Okay, people are not going to buy a second home now?
Joe just rolled his eyes. You want to go first?
I'm surprised you couldn't hear it. You know what, Chris? Such a great question. And I'll tell you, I'm always truthful on these, but I will tell you, a lot of people love to talk about it. A lot of people love to say, oh, I would love to sell my property, but my taxes are going to be too high. Or I wanted this, but my taxes are going to be too high. I wanted that, but my taxes are going to be too high. What a great problem to have. You've made so much money that you're going to have to pay a portion to the tax man. So as far as I'm concerned, that means you've done things right. Yeah, you're going to have to pay 15, 20, 25, maybe 30% right off the top to the tax man. But you know what? You're still keeping 70%. And that's a heck of a lot more than somebody that didn't invest in real estate. It's a heck of a lot more than somebody that hasn't made the wise choices that you've made. So are taxes a real issue? Are they a real expense? Yes, they are. But do I think that taxes should guide whether or not you buy rental real estate? Absolutely not.
And I will tell you, there's an enormous, industry of people who speculate on how something will affect something. In this case, how taxes will affect real estate. And, I was a board director. I'm a realtor. I was a board director at the Denver board for 5 years, but the stuff that the National Association of Realtors was coming out with was, once again, I would bet Joe's life that they were completely pushing the envelope and just fundamentally wrong in how this tax decree is going to change the market. You know, we are an interest group, and we have a incentive to try to affect policy, but it's just, in my opinion, you know, I don't know who I'm going to insult with this next one. It's utter hogwash. And I will be willing to bet anyone at any time that the predictions that NAR and many people in the industry made about how this will affect, that prices will go down 10.5% in this MSA or something, it's just bullshit.
I agree.
In my humble opinion.
I'm nodding my head with both of you guys in agreement. That was my initial thought. I mean, I've never made a major decision really worrying about paying a little bit more in taxes or not. Like, and plus, I think people still want to buy a house versus renting for the rest of their life as well. So, good.
And now let's not forget that, you know, our president is who's again? Right, Trump. And what did he do? Oh yeah, real estate investor. So investors made out beautifully. And I don't even know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I'm a taxpayer, so I'm not sure how I feel about this whole tax bill. One thing I do know though is investors weren't touched. So real estate investors are some of the few that are not in any way complaining about the new decree.
All right. Joe, Charles, any final thoughts or tidbits about the taxes before we start moving on?
No, not for me.
No, I kind of think the less we think about this, the better. I think it's like wonderful cocktail party conversation for people who, you know, don't have something better to do, like buy real estate.
All right. So as we wrap things up here, a couple of things I just want to bring to everyone's attention. So obviously we are 9 days in the new year at the time Joe, Charles, and I are doing this webinar. So I know a lot of people are doing their New Year's resolutions. And a few months ago, Charles, Joe, and myself, we all put out our investing strategies on the Denver Investment Real Estate website. I kicked that process off because I wanted to formulate my own strategy and to start having great people like Charles and Joe and other people share theirs. So I've got another great one coming out next week from Mark Cunningham, who's a property manager and investor around Denver. But I will say this, and I'll say it again and again and again. If anyone out there wants to sit down or brainstorm or talk about your investing plans with myself or Joe or Charles, we all love talking about this stuff. So if you guys ever want to reach out, bounce ideas around, please do so. You call Joe, call Charles, call myself. Even better, we can all sit down together, or you sit down with your agent and your lender as well, to kind of get everyone on the same page and map out a plan. And not just map out a plan to buy one property, but as Charles was saying a few minutes ago, hey, how do you buy a next property, another property, another property? Map out the entire next couple of years so you can help get towards your goal. So I sound like a broken record on this because I'm a huge believer in writing down your goals and your plans. So please write things down. And another thing we added to the website a little bit ago, and I just made it more prominent, and one of my goals for 2018 is keep it more up to date, is the events calendar on the website. So this will be pulling some of the Your Castle classes that Joe and Charles and other people at Your Castle teach, ones that are investing focused, I plan on putting on there, but I'll also be putting on webinars and other events that we are doing more through the Denver Investment Real Estate brand. So go to the website, education calendar. You can see it, start following it, and please come to local events, come meet us, come join us. We love meeting people. And one final announcement, next week on Thursday, January 18th, Charles is going to be presenting the Metro Denver real estate trends. So Charles, what is this class?
So this class is a class that we teach, you know, all the time, where basically we take the data and we look at what the market is telling us. We break it down in many, many different ways and try to understand the market better.
And I'll tell you guys, I've seen this numerous times. Every time I see Charles present it, I walk away with a different tidbit. He really does a deep dive into the numbers and then different ways to analyze the metrics around real estate and its Denver focus. It's incredibly interesting. And it's something that we actually don't put on the podcast channel. It's something that you really should see because there's lots of charts and lots of graphs with it. So it's much easier to hear Charles explain it. We can also see where his mouse cursor is pointing as to what's happening now versus 10 years ago. So that's Thursday, January 18th at 2 p.m. And go to denverinvestmentrealestate.com/webinar12. So Joe, Charles, thank you guys for coming out. I really appreciate it. I learned something from both you guys again. So thank you. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, man.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate it.
All right, everyone. Thank you for coming out, and we'll see you on the next webinar.